both of us had first jobs at P&G,
Hmm.
and both of us were very used to working in a company where the systems, the processes, and the culture was very well established. We had to just step into that system and become a part of it and make it work for us. But
Hmm.
when you venture out and do your own thing, you have to kind of start creating processes from scratch. So I'm really interested in how you started off on this journey, and how did you kind of navigate your way through this?
To your point, it's one of the things that, and in many ways I miss most about PNG was that there were processes in place, there were systems, and perhaps even more helpful were there were people who knew them well, so that if you had a question, if you got stuck, if you weren't exactly sure what to do next, you had either your manager or a mentor or another leader that you could go to and be like, what do I actually do? But when you're an entrepreneur, the person that you go to say, what do I actually do, is oftentimes you just staring in the mirror and you're like, oh, okay. All right. Well, I guess I got to figure this out. So that's also part of the fun, I think, of entrepreneurship. And so for me, what I did was just experiment, right? Basically kind of like scientific method type of mentality around experiment with a bunch of things. So for example, uh, I hate waking up early in the morning. And so part of me was like, okay, maybe as an entrepreneur, what's great is that I don't even have to set an alarm. And so I stopped setting an alarm, and I realized that I would just wake up later and later. So I'd go to bed later and later. And then eventually I was waking up at like 1 p.m. Eastern and like had missed half of the workday for the rest of the business world. I'm like, okay, so that's not sustainable. So then I tried like, you know what? Oh, I'm going to be one of those people that wake up at 6 a.m. every single day. And I would be relatively productive early in the morning, but I would hate the first 2 hours of the day because I'm not like a morning person. I'm not a morning person. I'm not a coffee person either. Don't drink coffee. And so I would just be miserably kind of productive. And I was like, that's also not the reason why I started a business. And so eventually, whether it was when I woke up, when I'm productive, et cetera, it was a big experiment to say, let me try some stuff for a little bit. I'll keep what sticks and let go of what didn't. And that's still happening today. I'm still, playing around with how much am I going to use Slack versus just email? What type of, with my team, are we doing daily stand-up meetings? Are we going to meet every other day or once a week? And continually testing stuff. And I think one, that's keep things fresh, but two, it keeps that mindset of building the system that works for you. Because people will sometimes ask, what's the best productivity system, or what's the best CRM, or what's the best blank? And the reality is the one that you use. And so it's, testing to find the one or the process that works best for you as an individual, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's something that I had to do a lot, and me and my co-founder had to do a lot when we were starting off, and still now. I mean, we're quite young. One of the things that made me start thinking was when we hired people, and then they would have to talk like on behalf of the company. And it's like when you talk on behalf of your own company, you kind of already know the tone and what you need to say and what you can't say, where you can't go. And it was the fact that, and at P&G, they taught us about the PVPs, and everything was
Mhm.
about the PVPs. And you kind of knew, you always knew that as a company, we should be saying this. I was also in PR, so I got a lot of media training, and I had to like speak at events or train people to speak at events. And with us, when we were starting off, it was like, okay, we have to really concretize this, like put it into words. What do we stand for? What do we not
Mhm.
stand for? What would we say? What would we not say? Did you define any kind of like a work culture for you guys, for your team?
So we started to. I mean, I think you're exactly right. Nothing will test your systems or your values or that kind of thing quite like hiring people, and hiring people that are away from, because yeah, if you hire people or you bring people in that are kind of already aware, etc., that's a little bit different than, a straight normal hiring process of like, this person doesn't know a ton about the company, but they've got a good fit. And so bringing them in. And so, yeah, that's stuff that we've had to create, because the other thing, and this is maybe a pro and a con of being an entrepreneur, is that I've developed not a system of procrastination. I joke that I don't procrastinate, but I do believe in just in time productivity, and that
Mm,
I only do things when I have to. And I'm not going to like, oh, let me create all this. And so then after bringing more people in, now it's like, oh, okay, yeah, we need to actually, even though it's been in my head for a long time, I need to articulate what our mission is, what our vision is. even to especially for us, because we talk about humor, and we actually help some companies with this as well, is creating a humor style guide. What is our sense of humor? Because we aren't, I don't think of us, we're not really sarcastic. We're not aggressive. We're kind of positive, more playful, more like puns and things like that, as opposed to aggressive types of humor. And that has to be a conversation that we have. So when people are representing the brand, that they have that type of style of humor. So for sure, it's something that we've had to test and we've started to build over time. But I also do think that that is part of the entrepreneurial spirit, is you are, you know, flying the plane as you are building it. And so you're going to create these things as you go along.
Yeah, that puts a very positive spin on it. And yeah, I
Yeah.
remember your sense of humor, and then your company sense of humor rated mom, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's
Exactly.
that's a very succinct way of putting it, and you just get it when you put it like that. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so switching gears, talking about your TEDx talk, which
Mm-hmm.
as of today I just checked out is at 7.2 million views. So it created great momentum for you
Mm-hmm.
globally. And what I'm really interested in is, as an entrepreneur, once you've done that, once you've been on the TEDx stage and you are also seeing the numbers afterwards, what are the strategic steps that you took after it went viral to ensure that you guys capitalized on the hype in the right ways?
I guess to give a little bit of context to the talk, it came out in June of 2017, and I think it was like 6 months later, in January of 2018, it only had 3,000 views. And admittedly, I was kind of disappointed, you know, because with any TEDx talk, you're like, okay, maybe it gets quite a few views or whatever. Maybe this like leads to a lot of
Mhm.
business. Maybe whatever happens, right? And but I was still very proud of the talk, and so I started writing a blog post that was kind of about, here's my experience of doing a TEDx. I remember finding a draft a little bit later of like, hey, it didn't, you know, it hasn't been all that successful, but I'm proud of it because it helped me get clear about my thinking, and helped me improve my speaking, it helped me like all of this. And then 3 months later, by, you know, April of 2018, it had 200,000 views. So it went from 3,000 to 200,000. And then by the year mark, it had 1 million. By the 2 year mark, it was at like 5 million or something like that, or 4 million. And then now it's at 7
Mm.
million. And so the engineer in me wishes I knew exactly what steps I took to get it from 3,000 to 200,000. And to get it to grow. The reality is that I don't know. The two things that I do know is, one, I added a picture of me on the TEDx stage to my dating profiles in January of 2018. And so I
When
don't
you
know,
were still single.
when I was still single, yes. So this is not necessarily, if you are married, not necessarily a strategy that I'm saying go after, but I added it, and I live in New York. And so maybe a bunch of people saw the image and then Googled it, and that increased it. If that's the case, I had way less than 200,000 likes on my profile. So if people watched it, they did not reach out afterwards. But there's that. And then also I started getting a lot of LinkedIn requests from uh, India and places in Southeast Asia and things like that. And I think it got popular there because I think it resonated with some people as like, you know, me being a nerd and kind of having this focus and things like that. And I know, you know, I at the time, I didn't know anything about kind of what they call dark social media. In the sense, it's your WhatsApp groups and your messages that you never see versus, you know, Twitter or other social media that's popular out there, or LinkedIn, you can publicly see, oh, this is how many views this thing has, versus in dark social media of like people chatting with each other back and forth, you have no idea how many times something is shared. And so I think it somehow started to get big there. And then from there, it took a life of its own. And as far as leveraging it starting to go viral, there's a couple things. One is kind of just communicating out some of the benchmarks that we would hit. So when it hit 200,000, you know, it was like, hey, we just hit 200,000 views on the TEDx talk. When it hit 1 million, hey, it's the year anniversary. Let's do a blog post about what it was like to prepare for such a talk. And it kind of walks through what's it like to do a TEDx talk. And then for, I think, the 5 million viewer, the 2 year anniversary, I did a video where I reacted to the YouTube comments on the video because I thought they were kind of hysterical, and some of them were super positive, some of them were negative, some of them were just straight out funny, some of them were comparing me to different celebrity doppelgangers that they thought that I looked like. And so I just kind of comment on those types of things. And it was creating content around the initial piece of content, right? It was taking something that already exists and building from there, and sharing it with a lot of people. You know, when the nice thing is for me, it's directly connected to my business. So when people ask about my programs, I can say, well, here's an 18-minute talk, watch it. You'll get a sense of my style, get a sense of why humor is important. You'll get a sense of what it is that we do. And oh, by the way, when you click on that link, you're going to see that 7.2 million people have now watched it, which adds a little bit of credibility as well. But even when it had 3,000 views, I would do that, and it was still a nice boost. So really that thing, which I think sometimes as entrepreneurs that we don't do well, is leverage, is build off of stuff. So rather than, oh, I've built this, now move on to the next thing, how do you then take the time to step back and really leverage what you've created?
It's interesting that you mentioned that a lot of people in South Asia, identified with it, and I'm from South Asia and I identified with it, and I wonder if there's like any parallels there. So I'm curious, when someone, and I'm assuming that some of these people reached out to you, like you said, on LinkedIn. So when someone reaches out to you that is not based in the same town, the same city, the same country that as you, do you think of that, like, do you see what you can do with that connection in any way that would bring value to your company, your work?
The hope is to do both. And one of the things that's really interesting about doing the talk and it being successful is that it changed my perspective, because I've done over 500 in-person events. We're doing now a bunch of virtual events as well, but I've done over 500 in-person events, and I've reached an audience who have seen me live of, I think, probably 50, maybe 60,000 people. And my one TEDx talk has disproportionately more views on that. And so I can have, in many ways, with my message, a greater impact by doing more virtual, by doing more video. And so one, it opened my perspective of that. Two, looking at the talk now, there are some pretty specific kind of American references where I'm like, oh, if I do want to appeal to a more international audience, maybe I need to be at least conscious of that. And then absolutely, it's changed my perspective of like, oh, that means we do need more blog posts on our website so that you can read that anywhere that you are and do that, or that Google can auto translate it. So if you don't even speak English as a primary language, that you can then start to get some of this content. Can we do more virtual presentations where people from all over the world can come together for a comedy writing workshop or an improv workshop? And for individuals, pretty much anyone who reaches out, my response is to say, thank you so much for watching. Hey, if you want more on humor, here's our newsletter. For some people, if they reach out and they're like, oh my God, I love this, change perspective, etc., then I'll sometimes ask for like, hey, can you just include that as a LinkedIn recommendation? Because those types of things, one, help the business, but two, it helps other people kind of experience the same thing, because people have reached out with incredible messages like, hey, this gave me a lot more confidence. This kind of like reinsured kind of how I was feeling or what I wanted to do. This like taught me, oh, humor is a skill, which means it can be learned. I've always been kind of jealous, or I've always been more introverted, or I've always been X, Y, or Z. And seeing other people say, hey, because of this thing, I've changed it, it can really help. And so we're trying to capture some of those things so that other people can hopefully experience similar benefits.
Okay, I wanted to talk about Operation Leave Corporate America, because I was fascinated by this, because when I left P&G, I did not plan for anything. I meandered my way out, and the only thing was it took me a long time to leave for pretty much the same reasons, where, job security and having a career path that was not just defined, but like I could define my career path and it was all there. I could kind of see it happening. Leaving that behind was quite intimidating. Especially, I don't know if you had this feeling, but when you're inside a multinational corporation like that, it always feels like life on the outside is much harder to navigate. So I know that you planned for it for 2 years, and you created Excel sheets and scenarios. When you were pulling the trigger, how was it making that final leap?
Pulling the trigger itself was not, I didn't see it as a risk. I wasn't actually too nervous about it because of the work that I did leading up to it. And the context for this is, so I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, which is P&G's global headquarters. And my family, we grew up lower middle class. Neither of my parents have college degrees. My starting salary at P&G when I started was higher than my mom's salary after 20 years of experience in HR at the company that she was at the time. And the context is basically I started P&G and I feel like I'm set, right? That is the Midwestern American dream of you work at a big company. It's a great company, one that takes care of you. You're going to have exciting job assignments. You're going to have job security. They tend to do well even in kind of downtimes, etc. I'm going to get married at 25, have kids at 26. I'll have the big house, the white picket fence, the 2.5 kids, the 1.7 dog cat combination or whatever. Like I'm going to statistically be right there. And I always loved my work at P&G, but what was happening was as I did more speaking, as I did more training, because stand-up and improv was something I started in college and was a passion and interesting, but never surpassed what I was getting at P&G. But then I started doing speaking and training and teaching people about the value of humor for the workplace. And that started to get more and more exciting. And so the delta change between my excitement between P&G project management and speaking and training was just getting bigger and bigger. And so that's when I was like, okay, I think I'm going to leave. And so then, I created this spreadsheet called Operation Leave Corporate America, and I listed all the things that I would need to do being comfortable leaving. So one of the things that we learn in marketing at P&G is reasons to believe, RTB. And, so I wanted to create, what are my reasons to believe I could be successful if I left? And so they were, make X number of dollars as a speaker, have X number of clients, have a website with testimonials, have, some photo footage of what I've done. Take off a week of vacation from P&G and only work on the business. Can I still be productive? Am I still motivated? Is this a kind of a long-term thing, not just a short-term thing? And when I checked off all of those things, I started to, as I was getting close to them and starting to be like, okay, is this still a thing that I'm going to do? I came up with 3 questions, and they're the 3 questions that I've asked myself any big decision I've made. So whether it was moving from Cincinnati to New York with P&G, whether it was leaving P&G for Human That Works, whether it was becoming a nomad and traveling around and having all my stuff in storage and just, living out of 2 carry-on bags. Those decisions, I asked the 3 questions that I ask are, 1, what's the worst that could happen? And the answer is usually death is usually the worst case scenario. But aside from death, what else? And so at P&G, it was like, okay, if I leave P&G and I fail miserably, I could probably get another job in IT with P&G on the resume, with being an engineer, with having some social skills because of improv and stand-up. I should probably be able to get another tech job if I want to. All right. So worst thing that happens is I try it for a little bit. I don't do it well, or I hate it. I go back into tech. Second question is, which will I regret more not doing? Because in studies of people who are at end of life, when they talk about regrets, the regrets are almost always things they didn't do, not things they did do. And so like, okay, what will I regret more not doing? It's like, oh, I think when I'm kind of old and gray, I would regret not trying this out, not trying to see if could I be successful starting my business. And then the third question I ask is, what makes for the better story? Because somewhere early in life, someone told me that, if someone wrote a book about your life, would anyone care to read it? And I've taken that to be like, okay, well, now what creates a story? And it's not even just would anyone care to read it, but if someone wrote a book about your life, would you care to read it? And that's been the distinction of like, I think it makes for a more interesting story if I leave P&G, because then maybe I would go back. I knew people who did go back to P&G or go back to big multinational company or that kind of stuff. So I was like, I think it's a better story to try this. And so those 2 things together, Operation Leave Corporate America, the fact that I had done these things to say I could be successful, had some savings, the fact that I had these clear answers to the question. When I finished that last check mark on the list, I went to my manager and was basically like, hey, I think I'm going to leave. And he was like, great. Are you going to go right now? Like, is today your last day? Is that what you're saying? Or like later? And I was like, oh no, I'm happy to stay on for a transition. So we finished at the end of the fiscal year. So that was like 4 months later. I helped with the big transition to someone else. And then that was July of 2012.
Incredibly fascinating to hear, because like I said, it's so vastly different from my journey out of the same company. And pretty much around the same time. I left November 2011. And I think we were also there for roughly similar periods of time. I was there for 5 years. Um,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah, I started in
So
August of 2006.
August of 2006, as I graduated in 2006 with a computer science
Yeah.
degree.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, I did my computer science degree because I wanted to be safe or like have a fallback.
Mm.
But then I ended up doing PR at P&G because I didn't want a job in computer science.
Yeah.
I've never worked for a day in computer science. But yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's it sounds really remarkably systematic, and the way to kind of eliminate fear from a situation that you're pretty much saying is it doesn't have to be full of fear at all.
And I mean, I list that, I kind of wish that I had the sexy story of that, I was in a meeting and I like got so fed up that I flipped over a table and stormed out or whatever. But all of the major decisions that I've made kind of in life have been these gradual things that have been, and it's the engineer approach, I think. And I know it's not quite for everyone, but it's taking it apart and looking at it. Like when I was deciding after becoming a nomad, do I move back to New York? Do I move to San Francisco? Do I move to LA? So I made another spreadsheet and it like had weighted averages for the things that I thought were important. And sometimes the spreadsheets it's not always about the exact number. Cause I think in that scenario, New York was a 65, San Francisco was a 64, and LA was like a 43 or something like that. So it was like way down. But it was also sometimes when you do that type of, data creation, you're like, oh, actually where I really want to be is back in New York. And so the emotions then come into it a little bit as well. But that taking things apart and really trying to remove some of the emotion first, look at the pure data, and then allow the emotion to come back into it, I think can have an impact.
It's a nice segue into my question about failure, because we're talking about fear and taking risks, and something that you've said a few times is like failure is just data, and that's something that here in China, especially in Shenzhen, the city that I'm in, people learn that really quickly. So this is like the city to be in for startups in China.
Mhm.
And there's this thing that people talk about, which is called failing fast. That if you're failing, fail fast so that you can learn from it, move on to the next thing.
Mhm.
So something I wanted to ask you was, A, do you agree with that if you're failing, you should fail fast? And B, I'm interested in knowing whether you have a system for yourself, because I'm sure you have a lot of systems in place. So do you have a system for learning from your failures, whether it's, I don't know, like work-based failures or jokes that didn't work, or things that you were planning out that didn't work?
If you're going to fail, then it's better to fail faster. But I think the thing that I don't spend, what I talk about more is about iterating, because I think whether you are failing or succeeding, you should be iterating. You should be having a feedback loop that makes things better, because sometimes we get so complacent with success that if we're not following up, we're going to like lag behind or whatever. And so I think absolutely fail fast if you're going to fail, but the intention shouldn't be failure. Right. I'll sometimes talk about in our leadership program, which draws on principles of improvisation, is, we've heard the quote from Edison that is some version of like, I didn't fail 10,000 times. I found 10,000 ways that didn't work.
Didn't work.
Right.
Yeah.
But the only reason why we know that quote is because he eventually succeeded. If he was the person that failed 10,000 times without ever succeeding, we'd be quoting Einstein instead. And we would be saying the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over again and expecting different results. And so there is still that success component that comes to it. So I don't think the goal is necessarily to fail, be like, oh, I want to go into this and fail. But instead recognize, failure is data. And to not have, sunk fallacy, right? That idea of like, oh, I've already started to put so much work into this, so now I have to continue it. Be like comfortable. That's one of the things that we'll encourage with project managers is celebrate when you cancel a project. Because so often, like 50% of projects end in failure. And so often they should have been stopped way before because the markets have changed, resources have changed, the project isn't quite what you expected it to be. So you should celebrate when you have the insight or foresight to say, this isn't working, let's stop. That should be let's celebrate it, now let's learn from it. And then I think, the other thing that I started to say is I think it's true is that you should have a process for feedback and debriefing anything that you do, whether it's a success or failure. One of the things that I thought was very helpful with P&G was a very simple start, stop, continue. So after every project, whether it's a success or failure, say, okay, based on this project, what should we start doing? What's a little bit new based on what we've learned? Hey, it's actually gonna be helpful if we do this thing instead. What things should you stop doing? What things did you try and you're like, hey, this actually wasn't that effective or that helpful? And then finally, what do you want to continue doing? What things tend to work really well? And we try to do that and implement that in a lot of our different programs.
That's fascinating. That's something I definitely want to try with our team. Start, stop, continue. I think I've heard of that before, but I never really, considered it. And it sounds like a really, really great strategy. Fun fact for anyone who's watching, which you probably know this, that Edison worked at P&G
Mm-hmm.
and quit, I think.
I think
So,
he was
or was he fired?
he was fired because
Fired.
it was early like telegraph type stuff, and they're like, no, it's still way easier for us to just send a pony from downtown to wherever it was in Cincinnati. And then he goes on and invents like the telegram. So I guess he was like, he took it personally, maybe, about everything about what PNG. But
Well,
yeah.
I mean, Edison was a bit wild, right? I can't imagine him being proctorized very easily. And it's really interesting that you talk about, I think you put it in a very elegant way of like celebrating the canceled projects. When I was in marketing, my ex-boss, he said something pretty much along the same lines in a less elegant way, where we were stopping a project and we were figuring out whether or not to continue some parts of it, and he said, you don't throw money after bad money. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, okay, that
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense. It's a very succinct way of putting it. So yeah, very, very interesting. Okay. We've already been talking about your work as a computer science project manager, and then now a humor engineer, the world's first self-proclaimed humor engineer. So I really like your quote on being an engineer is all about having the mindset of solving problems, and for you, humor is the way that you use to solve problems. So I would be interested in knowing about a time, and this is kind of worded in a way like a P&G interview would be worded, tell me about a time when you used humor in a meaningful way. I'm interested in that, like in a meaningful way to solve a problem.
Yeah, well, great PNG interview question, right? They're like, yeah, tell me a story. We want specific examples, not just kind of the resume kind of list. And I mean, there's a number of times that I think come to mind, because that's again our focus, the way that we approach things. But I think one that really comes to mind is, so we've been doing a little bit of work and some coaching with the Red Crescent Climate Center. And so specifically there's a great guy named Pablo Suarez. He's for a while already been incorporating, gamification into his presentations and et cetera, and exploring different ways. And he reached out because he wanted to understand a little bit more about possibly using humor. And so chatting with him, it was like, okay, what's the challenge that you're having? And what he was saying is that when they do these presentations all around the world to people from very different international backgrounds, sometimes to kids, et cetera, to other places, they're going in and they're talking about things that are important. Things like disaster preparedness. This is what you do if a flood happens. This is what you do in the case of a drought. If a tornado comes through, this is kind of how the things that you should do. And what he has said is, what he's realized is that boredom and those situations have very serious consequences, right? If you are an attendee to something that is telling you how to survive a flood, but you're distracted because you're so bored from what someone is talking about, you're not engaged, then a flood happens, there's going to be significant consequences to that, to the fact that you might lose your life, or someone that you know. And so the question is, how do you then solve boredom? Through, like, say, presentations. Oh, well, humor can be a solution to that. We're not saying that humor is a solution to everything. It can help in a lot of different scenarios, but in this case, can we use humor to solve the problem of people being bored in a presentation? And the answer is absolutely, right? You can make the presentation more engaging, more fun. And so we worked with him to do that. One, teaching him some basic structures of humor to create himself, giving him a couple of examples. One of the examples that I gave was, when you're talking about the idea of putting small amounts of sulfur, I think it's sulfur, something in the air, basically to block out some of the sun for climate change, that you can kind of equate that to tiny little umbrellas in the air. That's what he said. And I was like, oh, so when you talk about that, you should talk about and bring up Mary Poppins, right? Because Mary Poppins had an umbrella, came down, etc. Right? It's a reference that people will go. And he's like, that's a dumb idea. He's like, first of all, I don't think I'm talking to a bunch of students. I don't know if they'll even know who Mary Poppins is. Second of all, they're international, so there's even a higher chance that they won't know. Third of all, I hate the movie Mary Poppins. And I was like, well, first of all, this is not about your opinion of whether or not you thought Mary Poppins was a good movie or not. But I was like, I think if you do it, you will see good results. And now the good thing is that he also is like me of like, all right, we're going to test it. So we did a presentation and we filmed the audience with their kind of like agreement. We ran it through MIT's mood meter to be able to track attention, engagement, and kind of positive effect during the presentation. And sure enough, when he's talking about different things, attention is a little bit lower. He starts talking about the umbrellas, it goes up a little bit. He mentions Mary Poppins, and there's a huge spike. And attention and engagement, people are smiling and they're laughing and they pay attention for a little bit more. And then it starts to drop again. And then someone else in the class makes a joke kind of related to Mary Poppins and it peaks again and all that. So, right, we have now this data proof that is effective. And so to me, that's an example of using it to solve a specific problem, saying I have this challenge. Let's start with the problem first. Not let's start with use humor, it's great, but more of here's the challenge that I'm facing and let me use humor to get past it.
That's a really great example. I'm really interested in the part where you said that you actually first you were training this client and then you actually were there observing and filming and analyzing when he was delivering this session, this presentation. Is that something you do very often, that you don't just train, but you also kind of are there to manage and analyze and record the results?
It's not something that we do a lot. It's something I would like to do more of. And even in this case, I wasn't physically there. It's like we just set up a camera. He set up a camera to watch, and then we went through it a little bit later. But it's something I want to do more of because I know it's fascinating when we're talking about influencing people, convincing people about the value of humor. There's multiple ways you can go. You can go kind of, and it's back to, Aristotle's triad of influence, right? You can go logos, right? You can go the logic route and say, here are all the studies. And this is a great example of a logic route. Like I would love more data to say, look at this. We have, this setting, look at them kind of bored, and then now they're paying attention, etc. So there's a logos route. There's the, the ethos route.
The ethos, yeah.
Yeah. So we've got like, okay, do we have credibility? Our client list is our credibility in some ways to some people. So when we mention to people that we've worked with the United Nations or the Red Cross or the FBI or like things like that, people are like, wait, that's not like Southwest or Wendy's or these other people that we associate with funny brands. So what did you do for the FBI? What did you do for the United Nations? And so now they start to like, there's some credibility in that. Or you can go the pathos route, right? The logic thing of, we ask the very simple question of, would you rather do something that is fun or not fun? And it's a dumb question, but people are like, oh, I'd rather do fun. And so we make the then point of like, okay, so if you were to make your emails a little bit more fun, do you think people would be more likely to read them? If you were to make your, meetings a little bit more fun, do you think people would be more likely to show up, et cetera? So you can go kind of the pathos route as well. And so we would love more of the data for those that are influenced by logos, those that are like, yeah, show me the studies. And so we want to do more of that because we want to prove it out as well. I'm an engineer. If we were to do a study and we would find that humor was detrimental, it was distracting, it didn't actually lead to better results, I would stop using humor tomorrow in that scenario. And that's right. Absolutely the case, is that, again, it's not the perfect solution for every single thing. There are times that it can actually be detrimental, but for the scenarios that we're training people for, we see great benefit to it.
Because you're talking about being efficient, and that's something that you bring up a lot in your talks, because you love efficiency, and that's where the whole shortening of the name comes in, and everything related to humor and the way that you are managing your whole business. And something that really struck out when I was listening to one of your talks was that you were talking about being efficient versus being effective. And that's you said something about how it doesn't matter how fast you run, but if at the start of the race you're running in the wrong direction, then you're pretty much, you're not being effective at all. And
Mhm.
something that really struck a chord with me, because a lot of times I have a very proactive, let's do it, let's jump off the cliff mindset.
Mhm.
And our company is called Zen and Zany, and I'm the Zany in the Zen and Zany. So for me, it's like I am also obsessed with efficiency, like, with my calendar and my time management
Mhm.
and categorization and prioritization. And I've learned the hard way that sometimes if you just kind of leap into being efficient with all the ideas that you have, you don't really look at how you're being effective. So
Mhm.
because you talk about it, I'm assuming there have been times where you've realized this yourself. So can you
Mhm.
remember or tell me about a time where you've realized that, oh, I am being super efficient, but not effective at all?
Not necessarily effective. Yeah, and it goes back to, I mean, I'm a huge fan of Peter Drucker's work, and he says one of the things that he says is, and I believe it's Drucker, but he said that there's no greater waste than doing something efficiently that shouldn't be done at all. One that really comes to mind, perhaps one of the biggest challenges that I had at PNG was I started in Cincinnati, and then there's an opportunity that opened up in New York, and it was for an integration. Right, there had been an acquisition of uh, smaller fragrance company into PNG, and they needed a project manager to come in and help transition a lot of the software and things like that, which also included a lot of training and everything. And so I was hired, and I was hired a year and a half into the company to switch roles, which doesn't happen a lot. I also was top
Mm.
rated pretty much my first year, which doesn't happen a lot. And so I kind of went into this role being like pretty proud of myself, like, oh, I'm clearly pretty smart. There's a reason why they had me do this, and like I'm so good. And who is this acquisition company? They don't know the PNG way. They don't know anything. They don't know whatever. And so I went in and very much was like, basically from day one, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna do this, and then this, and then this, and then this. And I had set up very efficient systems. I had set the project plans. I knew when they were going to deliver and all that kind of stuff. What I did not take into account was uh, two things. One, that I did not know the business, which was very different than the business of fine fragrances was very different than the business of R&D upstream development that I was doing in Cincinnati. And two, I did not take into account that included in this plan, I would also need buy-in from the humans that were working. And this is what I've learned is that it is very difficult to be efficient when it comes to humans, particularly when it comes to managing emotion. So you can imagine if you've just been acquired by a big company, one, your big fear is that your way of life is completely changing and you're not going to have the autonomy and things like that. You're going to have to go through all these processes and systems and stuff like that. And then
Mm.
two, a young person that comes in that barely knows, anything, that is not fashionable at all, does not understand the industry, was wearing clothes that were far too baggy for him and everything else. Like clearly had never worn, fragrance a day in his life, except for Axe body spray, which is just completely wrong or whatever. Like you have a certain thing and they're coming in and telling you exactly what you need to do. There was a lot of then hesitancy. There was a lot of pushback, and the systems that I was trying to implement weren't even necessarily the right systems for that program. And so it took me probably 6 months of butting up against the wall and finally having a conversation with my mentor to kind of reveal that, like, yes, I had great efficient programs, but they were the wrong ones and they didn't bring in the human component to things. And so certainly since then have done this, have worked to get better at that. Still have, I remember in relationships always wanting to be efficient in relationships, in the sense of, if my significant other is talking to me and talking about a challenge at work, I want to be like, all right, well, you can solve that by doing X, Y, and Z. Or did you ever think about their point of view or all that? And it's like, that's sometimes not what you're being asked of. Sometimes the other person just wants to vent. Sometimes they just want to, like, I don't need you to solve anything. In fact, I don't even know if I need you to talk. Just like, let me share this out, say that sucks, and let's go eat pizza or let's go watch a movie or whatever. And I'm still reminded of that. And that's like, now with Sabrina, we're clear with each other. Sometimes I'll go to her and I'll be like, I just need to vent for a moment. Don't necessarily need that beautiful mind of yours that can solve problems. I love it, but I don't need it right now because I just need to get this out. And so, it's a constant kind of struggle, or not necessarily struggle, but thing to adapt, is that efficiency versus effectiveness. And the real ideal is when you can bring the two together.
For sure. And efficiency, when it comes to humans, it's a really kind of gets me thinking on so many levels. One is that, I find myself doing something really similar with my husband, where I try to finish his thoughts because I feel like I can get there faster. I know
Hmm.
what you're going to say. And it's become a huge pet peeve, to the point where, the other person feels undervalued, or feels
Hmm.
like, I'm not listening. And I feel like, but I did guess it correctly, right? This is what you
But I
were going
was
to
right.
say.
But I am good at this, though, right?
Then I realized, of course, being right doesn't matter at all.
Hmm. That's not the point. Yeah.
Yes. For those of you, who are not familiar with this, so Drew uses map theory to deliver humor, which is based on medium, audience, and purpose. And now, living in a during/post COVID-19 world, the medium has totally changed for you in terms of delivering your workshops and trainings and working with your clients. So I'm interested in knowing, how have you changed your business strategy during this time, and what do you see in the foreseeable future in terms of using those strategies to keep driving growth for your company?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the absolutely the medium has changed. What's interesting though is with the change, the purpose pretty much stays the same. You know, we still are using humor as a core means to help people to execute faster, think smarter, communicate better, connect closer, and lead further. Right, still across those 5 core skills that we talked about, that we talk about in the book and everything. So that's still the same. But our audience has actually gotten bigger, in the sense of we can do, we're doing more virtual things. We're connecting with more people from around the world. So I did a storytelling show this morning. It was 6 a.m. my time, but, like I think 7:30 p.m. in Australia. We've done, you've attended some of the writing workshops, and we've had people from China attend, from Australia, from Germany, from all over the US or in Canada or in Latin America or whatever. So our reach is a little bit bigger now in that sense. And, we've pivoted to a lot of virtual programs. And certainly there are differences when it comes to the humor that we use and the things that we can do in virtual. So just sheer, like, there's less laughter. We've joked, and sometimes I'll start a keynote with a little bit of a joke and have a laugh track included in my presentation, just because it's like, I'm used to hearing laughter. So I'm going to, solve that myself. Or, for our virtual stand-up shows, we are having people unmute themselves so we can hear laughter. We're sometimes having that in keynotes as well. So there's some system changes, but it's fascinating because it's in a weird way a sweet spot for us, because I'm bringing back that computer science engineering degree, and we're using different things to have picture in picture, go straight into slides. Or, I'm really a big fan of how do you leverage the fact that everyone's sitting in front of their computers now. Instead of thinking of it, it's like, how do we try to replicate the in-person experience as much as possible? How do we take advantage of the people that they can now spend 3 minutes on an exercise and be typing it up and it's not weird, or that I can seamlessly go from me talking into a video of something to demonstrate it and then back out of it with no sense of change for the audience members. And we're still growing on that, but I think, part of the goal is not just kind of mitigating the changes because of the medium change, but how do we leverage that? How do we accelerate that? How do we take advantage of it? And we're already starting to see that. And I think that's the key with a lot of people that we've been talking to about pivoting in this time is don't try to just replicate what you did before, but how do you elevate it? How do you create it as an experience that, hey, in the future, because I'm loving it so much that I want my future to involve a lot of virtual programs as well. Because I love traveling, I love experiencing new cultures, seeing people in person, delivering in person. But I also know that, Sabrina and I want to start a family, and I'm not always going to want to hop on planes all the time. And so if virtual can be a component of it, and say, hey, here are the advantages to virtual: lower travel costs, increased variety of people that can come in, can do the hands-on exercises and things right there in the moment. Or here's the in-person option, which there's advantages to that of, more, a little bit more custom, a little bit more kind of intimate, a little bit more like, connection and everything like that. Which one do you want? And that's our thought of this going forward. So we don't see it as here's a temporary thing that we're going to do, but how do we learn now so whatever happens next, we're, ready for it.
That sounds really great. It's really great to hear that you're embracing it and you're pivoting,
Mm-hmm.
and it's very interesting that you talked about the interactive element, and how you talked about, like, you figured out for yourself what you do need in terms of that interaction that would be
Mhm.
very easily missing. And that this occurred to me today. I was actually live streaming to supposedly 1,000 or so people
Mhm.
through this platform, through this partnership that we were doing. But I was using their platform, like our clients, our
Mhm.
partners' platform, and the platform was literally me having to present into a PowerPoint.
Mhm.
So I could not see anyone. The platform didn't allow me to even have like little bobbing heads or even like a chat room, nothing. So for like an hour and 17 minutes, I was just looking into my computer and presenting.
One of the things that,
Yes.
we encourage, because part of what we're doing now is because we've learned a lot, we're now doing presentations on how to have effective virtual presentations, which is a combination of the humor things that we've learned. Here's how to add humor, and here's how to, facilitate an applied improv exercise, etc. And then the virtual component of it, well, is, hey, here are the settings to make and all of that. But one of the things that we strongly encourage for everyone is just assume that you are crushing it. Right? If you don't hear the laughter because everyone's muted, just assume that you're doing well. And I think that's probably a good positive note to think of in general, is be a little bit, less hard on yourself, and be like, yeah, absolutely still want to grow and learn, but like assume that, anything that you're doing in these times, you're probably doing, fairly well. So assume that positive intent, assume you're crushing it, and that can probably help in any setting that you're doing it.
Audiences in Asia are a bit more shy than audiences in
Mm-hmm.
America, and it's they are not very used to interaction. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, they're not even very used to attending presentations, and they actually treat them as classes. And they
Mm-hmm.
actually call like instead of calling you by like another name, like for example, I don't get called ma'am, I get called teacher. Even
Mm-hmm.
if I'm presenting like in a business context, I'm not teaching a class, but people
Yeah.
will be like, hello teacher, that was a great session, I learned so much, I'm your student.
Yeah.
So there's definitely that culture still very much alive in China of like the mentor and the apprentice,
Mm-hmm.
and they really treat a lot of sessions like this with a sense of hierarchy and respect. So I think a lot of them, for a lot of them, is the same as kind of being quiet and just receiving the
Mm-hmm.
information instead of being interactive. So despite encouragement, a lot of
Yeah.
people will still not be interactive. So I mean,
Mm-hmm.
just to give you an example, I was present and I could see the numbers. It was like 1,400, like 1,400 people, and I got 15 questions
Mm.
from
Yep.
1,400 people. So that was a little little strange, but it's definitely something that that I'm sure you would encounter if you
Mm-hmm.
did shows or sessions here in, or like in Asia, or
Mm-hmm.
in more of Asia. That's something that I would like to end on that. Are you thinking of doing more kind of sessions or shows, especially in terms of your in terms of humor? I don't know
Mm-hmm.
if you're doing any stand up anymore, actually, but would you
Yeah. So yeah,
think
I
of?
still perform stand up. In fact, a
Hmm.
little bit more now than before, just because of the virtual thing. It's one of the offers that we're offering to some companies. If you're like, hey, we know that some people, like, I love keynotes where there's some messaging to it and some interaction and all that, but I some organizations are just like, we just need to laugh. We don't necessarily need to like learn something. We don't need to be taking notes throughout. We don't need the handout afterwards or whatever. We just need to laugh. And so we're working with a couple of different groups to produce some stand-up shows just for the entertainment side of things. And it's something I still love. To me, comedy in a way is a logic problem. It's like, how do I structure this as a logic argument so that people laugh, so that people understand this idea. So it's a fun thing for me to do. And when I travel, I typically try to do stand up in different places. So I've done stand up in Singapore and in Malaysia, and I've only spent time I've spoken in Singapore and the Philippines, but it's something that I want to do more. My goal is to try to get to as many countries as I can, and to share this message, and to also do it virtually with different places, because there absolutely is a cultural element to it. But I think that what people laugh at is different from culture to culture, whether that culture is by where they grew up, by what country they live in. It might even just be how they grew up, or their generation has different types of humor, etc. What people laugh at changes, but that people laugh is universal. That
Yeah.
people appreciate humor and fun, I think, is a universal thing. And so that's what I want to continue to do. Our mission is, as we talked about earlier, have you clarified some of these things for your people? And we've gotten very clear on our mission is to elevate the status of humor so that more people think of it as this valuable skill that they should be learning. And second, to teach people how to use it. And we want to do that all around the world, not just in New York, not just in the US, not just in North America, but on the entire planet. And hey, if we, build a colony on Mars, I want to, maybe be one of the first people out there to do some of that training as well. Like we want it to be a very kind of global thing for sure.
Awesome. So, you could be the first comic on Mars.
I'll take it. I'll do it.
That would be the dream. That would be pretty awesome. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking out the time to not just talk, but also, you gave me a lot of things to think about and a lot of very practical, valuable tips and strategies for business and then also for presentation. So thank you so much for that, so that I can use this opportunity to grow. And yeah, I would, love to continue our conversation. So yeah, thank you so much. It was really great talking to you and really great having you on this platform that we're trying to create for basically anyone who is an entrepreneur or who is an individual from the creative industry. And we try to kind of get lessons on entrepreneurship, lessons on basically learning the things in life that we've learned.
It was a great interview. Thank you for the research, for the great questions, for the exploration, and for putting together such a valuable resource for entrepreneurs. That's certainly something that I wish I had had when I was starting out. So I know it'll be tremendously valuable for people. So thank you for the interview. Thank you for the other people who do watch. And if anyone has any questions or wants to learn more, Humor That Works is our website, so they can find out a bunch of free resources there. And then, of course, certainly feel free to reach out to me. Always happy to answer questions for people.
Awesome. Thank you so much.